Imagine yourself in an elegant cafe, an oasis of tranquility in the midst of a bustling city. The trees sway gently in the caress of the spring wind, casting delicate shadows on the marble tables. A fountain in the center of the park plays a crystalline melody, its murmur mingling with the singing of birds, while the scent from flower to flower fills the air. Everything seems perfect, a peaceful corner reserved for the elite, where businessmen and elegant ladies sip coffee, exchanging light words and forced smiles. But just when the illusion of perfection seems complete, a scream pierces the air like a bolt from the blue. "Don't eat it!" A young boy, thin and dirty, his eyes wide with terror, breaks the silence. No one could have predicted what was about to happen. What happens will forever change the way you view courage, and the people society chooses to ignore. For this incredible story of courage and truth, stay with us for the finale. In the meantime, you can subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The Maple Grove Café was the epitome of luxury and refinement, nestled between perfectly trimmed hedges and white gravel paths that sparkled in the sun. It was the refuge of those who had it all: power, money, and the luxury of being able to indulge in time to idle. Among them, James Callahan was a living legend. At 72, he was success in its purest form. He had built a real estate empire from scratch, and now he dominated the central terrace, sitting like a king on his golden throne. His impeccable suit and gold-rimmed glasses reflected the sunlight, but also decades of power and wealth. In front of him, Marissa, his young wife, looked like an ice queen. Her jet-black hair fell in perfect waves to her shoulders, every detail of her appearance studied with surgical precision, from the crimson lipstick to the diamond bracelet that caught every ray of sunshine. But behind that dazzling smile lurked something cold and distant, an emptiness that not even luxury could fill. In a shadowy corner, Marco watched. He was a thin boy, wearing a worn sweatshirt too big for his thin body, invisible to the customers of the cafe, but attentive to every detail. His dark eyes followed every movement, every dish served, every furtive gesture. He was hungry, yes, but not just for food. He was hungry for hope, for justice, for a chance to be seen, to be recognized in a world that seemed to have forgotten him. The wind carried the low buzz of conversations, mixing it with the clinking of crystal glasses and the intense aroma of freshly ground coffee. A waiter with impeccable movements served the orders with elegance, while some customers, immersed in their conversations, did not even notice the boy who was observing from afar. The tension in the air grew as each gaze met, suspended in an unreal silence. The walls of the cafe, adorned with antique paintings and mirrors, seemed to hold secrets from bygone eras, making the atmosphere even more charged with expectation and mystery. In that moment, every single detail, from the clinking of glasses to the dancing shadows on the walls, acquired a profound meaning, as if destiny itself was being written before everyone's eyes. What would you have done in Marco's place? Would you have had the same courage, or would you have been afraid of the consequences? Write it in the comments. We want to know your opinion. When James looked down at his phone, Marco saw something that made him jump. Marissa's elegant hand slipped into her purse, a gesture as measured as it was treacherous. Out came a small, transparent vial, which seemed to contain a dark secret. With a swift movement, Marissa poured the contents into James's steaming soup, and the liquid dissolved immediately, disappearing without a trace, as if it had never existed. Marco's heart tightened in terror. Had he really seen what he thought? Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to flee from that place where superficiality masked lethal plots. Who would have believed the words of a street kid, considered by many to be insignificant and invisible? And yet, when he saw the spoon approach James's lips, an impulse stronger than fear took over, shaking him to the core. "Don't eat it," she cried in a voice filled with desperation and courage, shaking the very foundations of the illusion of perfection. Time seemed to freeze. The laughter died away, the conversations died instantly, and a heavy silence fell over the cafe. James stopped suddenly, the spoon hovering a few inches from his mouth, as if every moment had become an eternal question. Marissa turned slowly, her features tense in an icy mask that betrayed her growing uneasiness. "What did you say?" His voice was sharp as a blade, ready to punish anyone who dared to dent his impeccable control. Marco swallowed, but did not look away, maintaining his sincerity and desperation. "I saw... she put something in your soup. Don't eat it," he declared with a trembling but firm voice, challenging the superficiality that had dominated until then. James put down his spoon slowly, while the silence became even more oppressive. Some customers began to murmur among themselves, and the curious glances moved from Marissa to Marco. The waiter stopped a few steps from the table, uncertain of what to do. The scene, steeped in tension and revelations, took an unexpected turn. At that moment, the cafe, until a short time before the scene of frivolous chatter and sips of coffee, transformed into a stage of hidden truths and moral dilemmas. The soft lights, which seemed to have always accompanied the elegance of the customers, now crudely illuminated the expressions of those present, revealing faces furrowed by regrets and fears. A thin shiver ran through the air as fate became the stage for a moral challenge. The contrast between those who lived in the comfortable illusion of success and those, like Marco, who were forced to survive on the margins of a society that seemed to have forgotten the value of human dignity. The walls of the cafe, which had witnessed countless encounters of power and money, now seemed to whisper stories of injustice, of lives broken by arrogance and corruption. The silence was broken by the faint sound of hurried footsteps. A young waiter, who had been keeping his distance until then, made his way toward James's table with an expression of deep concern. His hands were shaking as he tried to grasp the situation, aware that every moment was decisive. The customers, now united in a silent understanding of amazement and tension, held their breath, almost fearing that even the slightest movement could trigger an irrevocable reaction. Meanwhile, outside the cafe, the wind seemed to tell the story of a changing world. The leaves, moved by invisible currents, danced in a whirlwind that recalled the uncertainty of fate. The shadows of the trees stretched like accusing fingers against the concrete of the city, evoking the incessant struggle between good and evil, between light and darkness that lurked behind every seemingly insignificant gesture. Marco, his heart beating wildly, understood that that moment could be the turning point not only for him, but for all those who had learned to ignore the suffering of others. In that cafe, where luxury and elegance seemed to dominate, an act of silent rebellion was about to take place, a cry of protest against a system that fed on the fragility of the weakest. Marissa's gesture, so calculated yet so dangerous, had exposed the truths hidden behind the fake smiles and empty conversations. While some customers took courage and prepared to intervene, others remained paralyzed, trapped between the desire to remain in the illusion and the awareness of the evil that lurked beneath the surface. The sunlight, which moments before had painted the cafe in golden hues, now seemed to have been replaced by a relentless grayness, as if to underline the passage from dream to harsh reality. The elegant cafe, symbol of a seemingly perfect world, had become the theater of a shocking truth, where the courage of an outcast boy had questioned the legitimacy of a system built on privilege and inhumanity. And while voices began to rise, bringing with them demands for justice and truth, the fate of each individual present was intertwined in that narrative, ready to rewrite the rules of a world that could no longer afford to ignore the suffering and desperation of those, like Marco, who were only trying to be heard. If this story moved you and made you think, write what you think in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Your contribution is precious and helps us continue to tell stories that challenge conventions and awaken courage.